Lucky you.
36 best
Tuned
holes in
into
golf.
Alternate Shots podcast,
Barney's Army.
where we talk about golf,
Sandy.
poker,
James Bond.
horse racing,
Double.
classic movies.
Zenyatta.
We have no script.
Down the stretch they come.
We are glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
If you like our content, we ask you to please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Well, boy, are we lucky today. We are so lucky today. All you Alternate Shots podcast fans, we have a special guest. Billy and I couldn't be more thrilled. I think he's going to be one of our top guests over the years, and he is none other than John D'Andrea. Oh, you don't know that name? Okay, you're going to know him, as my friend Alicia says, the man who is Birdman. Welcome to the podcast. We couldn't be more thrilled to have you here. How are you?
Thanks, Bobby. Nice to be here. You're far too kind with that introduction.
The only time I've ever seen you this early in the morning is when I drew the short straw in the member. Got the 7 o'clock tee off time.
Billy is not a 7:30 tee-em up do sweeper guy. Early for Billy is 1 minute before 9. Regular for Billy is 9. So John, tell us, you're a Larchmont guy growing up near Wingfoot. You remember, how you stumbled into that gate and what your first experiences were? We got to love to hear this.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like it was yesterday. The memories are so vivid. I mean, I'm thinking the story starts around 1972. I was probably in second grade at the time, and I had a classmate. Bobby, you probably remember him. His name was John Burleson. He was my classmate, and his parents were members. And his grandfather would take us up to go fishing in the pond out of 4 East when I was 9 years old. And we'd fish with his grandfather, and then he'd take us up to the terrace, and we'd have lunch, and we'd sit there and watch all these people come by. And John started caddying a little bit before me. He probably started caddying in 74. We were the same age. I started caddying in 75.
But he took you fishing. That's great.
Yeah, no, his father didn't play golf, and he didn't. I mean, he may have greased Gene, but that wasn't the reason. He had an incredible work ethic. He was up there sun up to sundown, and he just loved the place. And he actually saved up enough money to buy an Alfa Romeo sports car, brand new, through his caddying money. By the time he was like a sophomore in high school.
Yeah, must have been the envy of the school.
Yeah, he was a great guy. But it was through him that I got to Wingfoot. So we used to come up and screw around on the putting green, and eventually I started caddying there in 75.
Did you have any idea what was in store for you over the coming years?
No idea. But what I will say is in 1975 was the first year I was caddying there. Evel Knievel shows up at Wingfoot. And I think a lot of people in this era don't realize it, but 1975, Evel Knievel was the equivalent of Tiger Woods or Michael Jordan or Muhammad Ali. He was a global icon.
Headliner.
Yeah, he had just jumped over unsuccessfully 13 buses at Wembley in front of 80,000 people. Fractured his pelvis, broke his hand, was paid $1 million for it. The following year, he jumped in Kings Island in Ohio, and 57% of U.S. households tuned in to view it. It's a record. It's never happened again. That gives you an idea how popular he was. So anyway, he shows up at Wingfoot. I didn't caddy for him, but I remember I went out and followed him. I remember who was in the group. It was him, Doug Sanders, his manager, and Kelly Mosier.
But many of us watched them because it was better than the U.S. Open because you had so much gambling going on here, right? What was the gambling like?
Exactly. Well, first of all, he had a cane because he had crashed a couple months earlier, so he was limping. He took a cart, but he had a cane with him, and the cane it was encrusted with diamonds on the top in the symbol of a motorcycle. and it was a flask. He showed it to me. He unscrewed the flask and he filled it up with vodka. So, he would walk down the fairway and he would drink out of this cane. And he was by far one of the most charismatic people I ever met in my life. I mean, an incredible personality.
And you probably did too. They had stupid bets. I remember on 3 West, and you probably were there too. Somebody, maybe it was the business manager, hit it in the bunker, or Doug Sanders hit it in the bunker. Back in the mid-'70s, right, John? It was a $500 negative garbage. So you lost $500 to every other guy, right? But if you got it up and down, you got $1,500. So there was $1,000 profit to be made by putting it in the bunkers.
Exactly. The other interesting thing was they let the caddies hold the money. So they paid out on every hole. Every hole was a payout. So whoever lost the money, they had to pay out, and the caddies were holding the money.
But back then in the 70s, there were very few carts. They had probably 6 or 8 golf carts going on. The girlfriend was there, and there was ice and some frescas in the back of that golf cart. This is at 8 o'clock in the morning, right?
No, they played twice. My memory is they played Winged Foot twice, and the first time they played, they had Doug Sanders was famous for traveling with escorts, and they had 2 escorts with them, beautiful women in a golf cart, and they let me ride in the cart with them. Oh. So here I am, a 12-year-old kid riding around with these 2 escorts, and the cart's filled with booze, and these guys are playing for a couple $1,000s a hole. And I looked around and I thought, man, this is it. I'm gonna spend the rest of my time watching this and doing this. I mean, I was hooked. I can remember Kelly's wife who worked in the shop came out, and she was, I think she didn't come out, but she watched him on the turn, and she said, I remember her saying, we don't have that kind of money.
You caddied, and I did with Gene Hayden and his nephew Jeff. But the caddies were legendary back then. I was telling Billy about Bud Girardi, and then there was Murph the Surf, right? Tasty, remember Tasty and Cab Calloway? Who are your favorite guys, and what were their nicknames? And tell us about those guys back then.
You've nailed a couple of them. One of my favorites was a guy by the name of Ice Cream Don. And the reason he got the nickname was he used to drive the Good Humor truck. And he was a big drinker, and he would park the Good Humor truck in New Rochelle. There was a bar there, and he'd go into the bar. And it was just a matter of time before the kids figured out his routine. So they used to raid the truck every day while he was in there getting drunk. Nice. His brother had like a management job in the ice cream company. So his brother was always able to cover it for him at the end of the day. Well, one day they stole the truck, and that was it.
They stole the truck.
That's a tougher one to cover for there.
They couldn't cover it, so he became a caddy, and so he showed up with his like whites on, and so Gene nicknamed him. So he was one of my favorites. Then you had another guy, you probably remember him, Bobby, named Sammy Davis. We called him Sammy Davis.
Looked just like him.
He looked just like him, and he was dressed to the nines, and he used to call, hey, boss man, come on, boss man, put me out there, boss man. He used to sit right in front of Gene, and finally Gene would be so aggravated with him, he'd just send him out on the golf course.
But Zeke, he caddied for Hinman and Tutwiler, the 2 finest amateurs, when they came up to Winged Foot for the Anderson, but he was every bit as good as them. And he might have been a professional golfer if he was around today.
Agreed. I mean, Gene Hayden told me exactly the same thing. He said to me one time, this guy could have been out there playing with them.
Birdman, I'm really curious. This means you were there the day Pat Collins started then.
Yes.
What was that like?
Pat had worked there for years. I mean, his father caddied there and worked on the weekends. So he did the scoring on the weekends. So he knew everybody. So there wasn't really a transition. I mean, he just took over. He knew everything and everyone there. There was no learning curve, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I can remember the time, we were all young, restless juveniles, and Gene was really strict. And when Gene left, we were kind of like, I don't know if we want to do this or not. So we'd be hanging around down by the pool, And Pat would come down and grab us. We didn't really want to work. We weren't sure what we wanted to do. And so Pat would have to go down there and round us up. Come on, get up here. Get
up. Get these bags up there.
Yeah. Put those cigarettes out. He used to say to us, smoke and get back.
Well, we missed the elephant in the room. How did you come and acquire your nickname? How did you acquire it? And how has it stayed with you all these 50 plus years?
Yeah, good question. Gene Hayden kind of dropped it on me. Back then, if you remember, like the railing where the bags are set now, those were hedges at one time. And Gene used to go up into the grill every morning, and he used to take the dinner rolls, the bread rolls from the night before. There'd be a big bag of them, and he'd bring them down, and he'd have us break them up and put them on the hedge. And so he'd say, hey, come here, Birdman, you get these birds, feed these birds over here. So that's kind of where it started. And it's like anything else. I guess it stuck and it evolved. And then once I started traveling with the Grateful Dead, I was kind of there one week and gone the next. And somebody once said, he's looking for the perfect perch. He's not here right now. That was Shorty and Norman, and Shorty was a phenomenal guy. He was part American Indian, Native American Indian, and he lived in Riviera Beach down in Florida. So what happened was, when Claude was the pro at Seminole, Claude was encouraging those guys to come up and caddy at Wingfoot. So that's how they ended up at Wingfoot. They came up through Claude. They were all Seminole caddies, and they'd come up and caddy at Wingfoot in the summer. And Shorty was a wonderful guy.
What about Norman?
Another great guy. Very, very smooth, dressed to the nines. I used to get out with Shorty a lot, because if there was a threesome or something, I'd be out early with Shorty. And nobody had a bank account back then. And he'd take out his money on 15 West, and he'd start counting it. He had his whole seat, the money, and he'd be counting it. And then the guy would hit, and he'd look, and then he'd have to start the count over again. And he said to me one time, he says, I'm not like these other caddies. I groundhog my money. He said, I groundhog it.
And this interesting picture about this tree is it's not there anymore, as we talk about. And this circle is now totally open. Matter of fact, they'll put tables and chairs out there for weddings or other big events. But, compare your recollections of Wingfoot back into the 70s to the 2020s now. What was it like then, and what is it like now?
I say this to people all the time. They're like, wow, you've been there a long time. You must know this golf course. And I said, not really. This is not the golf course I grew up on, especially in terms of the greens. Very different in terms of, reading greens now, in terms of reading greens, 10 years ago. Very different. I'm not as familiar with the greens now as I was back then. For me, it's a lot more wide open. I don't know. The game has changed so much. I sound like, I guess I sound like everybody at some point, where they just look back and go, wow, it seemed like it was a lot better back then than it is now.
24, maybe just before you got there, I caddied for Bob Colby, Bob, or you knew Bob through Jay and all that. And it was 7 inches, and it was brutal. But this rough here today, which is what, 2.5 inches, Billy, it's just as bad.
It's different because, like I've said before, it leads you to believe you can actually hit a club out of there that you can't. So it invites you and challenges you to try something that might be a little, that you wouldn't have tried in 7-inch rough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you look at what Phil did on 5 West on Sunday. I think it was on Sunday. He tried to hit something out of the rough. It went 10 feet or something.
Yeah.
It was, to your point.
If that cost him a shot, that cost him everything. You can always go back and find one shot that would have changed everything, but that one glares at you.
In the 8 Open, golf was still not that big. We had 10 corporate tents on the driving range. The country was kind of coming out of a recession. Golf wasn't that big. So the galleries weren't that big compared to what they are today. But on Sunday, I have friends of mine that lived right across the street from Fred Corcoran's house. So I spent a lot of time on Griffin Avenue there. And on Sunday, I came out of their house to watch the last couple groups play, and I walked across onto the back of the 15th West Green. And Jack was paired with Lee Trevino that day. Right. And they weren't that far out of the hunt. I mean, Trevino finished top 10 in 84. But I remember standing on the back of that green, and the only person back there was Phil Clark. He was standing there smoking a cigar, and we watched him putt out. And Trevino turned to Nicholas as they were walking off the greens, and he said, God, I'm glad I don't have to caddy at this golf course. I haven't read a putt right all day. And with that, they headed to 16, and there was nobody out there. I mean, and they weren't that far back. I mean, so we watched them hit off, and then eventually Norman and Fuzzy, came to 15, and then there was a gallery. But
so let's take a look at the 1984 U.S. Open at Winged Foot final round. Norman versus Zeller. Pretty dramatic.
Go 5 or 6 feet back. It's not bad looking putt though, is it? Can you believe it? Do you think that some things are fate and some things are meant to be? Because you can't do any better than that. That is almost awesome and godlike. Fuzzy, he may think he's made a birdie. I don't know what Fuzzy thinks.
One putt.
Would you like to go over the 3 4s that man just made in 16, 17, 18? You can't make 1 4 out of the 3.
No.
I think it's just incredible. And that, when you try and explain to non-golfers what this game's all about and how it can change, it's seemingly such a passive game.
He surrenders.
That is marvelous, you see. That is something.
Another great Open at Winged Foot, the 1984 U.S. Open. So much drama, so many great players, as you heard before. Nicholas and Trevino were in there. Nicholas hadn't yet won his 1986 Masters, so they were capable of winning majors. So they played off the next day, Monday. They went down number 1 West, and they both birdied 1 West to start the playoff. And then Fuzzy makes this 60, 70, 80 footer. I don't remember how long it was, from the back of 2 West to the front. And Norman makes a double bogey, and it was over at that point. What a great Open, the 1984 U.S. Open.
Did you ever have any experiences with Fred Corcoran? He was still playing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he, I caddied for him a lot, and he was kind of a grumpy old guy. So I'd get him, and he'd say to me, he'd have a cart, and he'd say, "You're carrying the bag. You're not putting it on the cart." All right, whatever. And then we'd get to like the back 9, and he always played in the afternoon. And he said to me, "So why didn't you get here early this morning?" I said, "I was here early this morning." "What do you mean?" "Did you caddy already?" I said, "Yeah, I already went 18 holes." And then he felt bad. "Oh, put that bag on the cart. I didn't know that." So we'd get to his house, and, he was playing with Sammy Kay and Howard Carter and his buddies, and they'd go in there and they'd start getting drunk. His wife would come out, and she'd bring us Cokes and stuff. And they'd get so lit that at a certain point, his wife would come out and say, "They're not going to finish the round, so you can go on back."
Fred Corcoran was perhaps the guy that started sports agency, right? He was Babe Diedrich and Zaharia, Sam Snead. He was everybody's agent back then and there, all the greats, right? And he was the most creative guy. The standard bearer today, the one that walks around with the scores, he invented that. You weren't friends with Fred Corcoran. You were invited. The 14th East is about, 150 yards from that tee over to his back. People would go over there, and then they wouldn't sit there like Fred and Sammy Kay and Howard Carter. They would go on. But plenty of people have had the special pleasure of his backyard.
The halfway house.
Well, I knew Billy from Winged Foot a little bit, not that well, but in 1980, I dropped out of school after about 3 months, and a friend of mine was going out to caddy on the tour, and he said, "Why don't you come with me?" And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting, but I was more interested in seeing the Grateful Dead on New Year's Eve in San Francisco, so that was the first stop, and that's what I did. And then I met him down at Pebble Beach, and I started caddying. That's the tour kind of started. There was a tournament called the Spalding Tournament. It was kind of an unofficial event, and that's what kind of kicked off the year. So I caddied on that West Coast swing in 1980, and then I got to know Billy better. One thing led to another, and over the years, I was more interested in going to Grateful Dead concerts than I was in caddying on the tour. There was no question.
How many Dead concerts?
Over 130, all over the world.
So you're the real McCoy.
Yeah, I had
an original Deadhead.
I had some great times with them. So I wasn't, and the guys that I knew out there that were my age that started caddying when I did, people like Tony Navarro, ended up caddying for Greg Norman for 10 years, Mike Hicks, Payne Stewart, a lot of the guys that stayed out made it real big. I wasn't really that interested. I was more interested in going to concerts. So I drifted all on and off the tour. I would come in and out, and that's how I got to know Billy. And through Billy, I got to know Jay, and Billy set me up with Jay to caddy for him at Westchester one year. And we were paired with Freddie Couples and Jack Nicklaus. I mean, talk about a pairing. And Jack had brought a guy by the name of Willie Peterson up from Florida to caddy for him. Willie Peterson had won the Masters with him every year except the one that his last Masters that he won with his son. So he was a legendary Augusta caddy. And the other caddy was a guy by the name of Squeaky, who went on to caddy for Nick Price and had an incredible career out there, and then died of leukemia, really tragically.
Well, Squeaky was the guy that Nick Price may have had a baby, and so he didn't have Nick for that big PGA. And who did he take? He took John Daly.
Exactly. Yeah, wonderful guy. Passed away. He had leukemia and died. So anyway, that's how I got in. That's how I met Jay, was through Billy.
Billy might have been the best golfer, right? He might have been the one to follow in Claude's footsteps. What's your opinion?
Yeah, Billy was super talented. People don't realize Butch won the BC Open. Butch actually won a PGA Tour event. So he was obviously very talented. But I think you're right. And I think if you had asked Claude, I think that's what he probably would have said too. Billy was incredibly talented.
What I just learned is that the Wingfoot membership owes the Grateful Dead a great deal of gratitude. Because there would be no Birdman at Wingfoot if it weren't for the Dead.
Well, actually, you could turn it around and say, actually, I owe the Wingfoot membership a lot of gratitude, because without Wingfoot, I would have never gotten to any of those concerts. I would come in and out. I would work for like a week or two, and then in between tours, and boom, and then I was gone. And I got one last great story for you. So I'm caddying for Jerry Haas, who's Jay's younger brother, in the Open at Shinnecock, and Billy's caddying for Jay. Guy by the name of Lynn Strickler, who was a legend, was caddying for Curtis Strange, and we're playing a practice round, and Tom Watson joins us. Bruce Edwards is caddying for Tom Watson. So we go out. Watson just joins us. So Bruce stays back on the tee because Watson's still getting his act together. So we go out on the back nine. We're four caddying, and I just come off a Grateful Dead tour. And they look at me and they say, "We know you're holding. Get it out. Break it out." So I pull out a joint. We light it up in the practice round. And Lynn is kind of fumbling around, and he goes to Billy, "Give me a cigarette." And Billy goes, What do you want a cigarette for? And he says, and he had a voice like Clint Eastwood. He said, "I don't want to have to tell Curtis he's got 138 to the front and have it come out Lebanese. So hand me a cigarette." So, I mean, it's one of the most tolerant memberships in the world, and I've always said that. And fortunately, there's still a few people there that tolerate me. So,
are you the senior caddy there now? Is there
there's a guy by the name of Kenny Wesley, who Bobby knows.
Oh yeah.
And Kenny's been there since I think the late 50s.
Wow. Family, Gus, Al. No. Al worked at IBM. Do you have any favorite holes, Bird? Do you have 2 or 3 favorite holes, or because of some experience, or what?
I mean, yes, for sure. I mean, I lived there for a couple of years. I took care of Paul Callahan's house. And then for the last, I guess you guys know, Buddy Stewart just passed away. I
Yeah.
took care of Buddy's house for the last 10 years, and that's right across the street. So 10 and 11 West are really close to me. I mean, can you remember, Bobby, Walter Kolb? That whole yard was a putting green without a cup in it.
Maybe Walter or maybe Teddy Horton just felt, well, I'm going to go have those Toro Motors go over there and do his yard, because every day it was cut. It was not like anybody else's backyard. It looked like the fringe of any Wingfoot Hall.
People literally walked off that tee and gasped when they looked out at that lawn. I mean, it was that unusual.
We're going to have you back again, because we just scratched the itch, right, Billy?
I learned a lot of things today that I didn't know.
You got 98% stories still left to tell us, and they're still all clean.
The names have changed to protect the guilty.
Thanks, Birdman.
Thanks for joining us today.
Billy Harmon.
We really appreciate your
Double
feedback.
Indemnity.
And please
Arky.
subscribe to the
Two
show
Outer.
and hit
Claude
the bell
Harmon.
icon so you get notified.
Movie Classics.
New episodes.
Mark Gable.
Hit 'em
Odd
hard
Job.
and hit 'em off.
Best 36 holes.